Welcome to Morning Bytes with Stu, Jason, and Violet, broadcasting live on May 1st, which for most of the world is International Workers' Day. So if you're joining us from the outside of the US, thank you for spending your holiday with us. But if you're in the US, welcome to regularly scheduled productivity. Morning Bites is, of course, the show where we take the biggest and best cyber and privacy news stories and the biggest and best cyber and privacy guests and try to make sense of everything in 30 minutes with just enough chaos to keep it interesting. So we have some quick ground rules before we get going. These views are our own and not of our companies. This is recorded, so your comments will live forever. So tell us where you're joining from. Give us some fun questions. You can poke fun at us if you want. But also know that this is recurring and run, so your comments will live forever. So if you're going to stir the pot, at least make it clever. Now let's get into this because we have two awesome guests who don't show up often to quick conversations like this. They're meant for the main stage, but I want to introduce friends and colleagues, Shiraz and Kelly. Shiraz, let's go first. Shiraz Saeed, cyber insurance often gets described as a young market, which is funny because Shiraz has been around long enough that he knows where all the bodies are buried. He's led, underwritten, structured, and influenced this space through multiple market cycles. And before ransomware was a dinner conversation topic. And before half of the market learned how to spell systemic risk. But now we got Shiraz. He doesn't just understand cyber insurance, he makes us understand it. And if we're lucky, we'll get a hot take today from him. And then joining him is Kelly Castriota. While most of the industry is still debating what AI means for risk, Kelly went ahead and built a company around the answer. She's the founder and CEO of Ardiga, a specialty MGA platform underwriting risks driven by legal and regulatory dynamics across long tail lines. And I realized I didn't even say where Shiraz is from. Arc, Excess, and Surplus, a broker friend to many. So we have two great interactions today with someone from the MGA side and someone from the broker side. So we're going to kick it off with, let's go with what news stories are we thinking about this week? Kelly, because you're one of our guests for the week, for the month of May, what story has been on your mind lately? What's in front of you?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for welcoming me on the show, Violet, Stu, and Jason. This is really fun and nice to see you, Shiraz. So my story is sort of an older one that's come back around. So I don't know if you guys remember at the end of last year, there was a company that is a U.S. incorporated company, but exists in South Korea called Coupang. I think I'm saying it right. But essentially, they're the South Korean version of Amazon. So huge retailer. It was an inside job where former employees stole an internal security key, and there was a 34 million user access, data access breach. So sort of boring, but it became very non-boring very quickly. So initially what happened was that there was like a big public outcry in Korea and a really aggressive government response, depending on what side of this you fall on, whether it's aggressive or not, that's the huge question. But essentially there were police raids on the headquarters, audits. The CEO was a Korean American, and he was asked to cooperate with the government investigation, declined to do that. And then this became like, it came back into the spotlight a couple of weeks ago because now it's become something of a domestic regulatory and reputational crisis dispute. So the U.S. administration is claiming that South Korea's response to this was overwrought, and it's really an attempt to basically discriminate against U.S. companies and U.S. listed companies in favor of maybe Korean and other Asian companies that are in competition. Largely the company's refusing to cooperate with the regulatory schema in South Korea, saying that it doesn't need to. And so there's just this broad sort of scope now in terms of, the broader diplomatic and defense discussions, because at the same time, South Korea is trying to cooperate with the US to develop nuclear submarines. And so it's really just like circled into this huge, potential claim with severity. I don't know who insures this company, if they even buy cyber insurance, but what seems like really mundane has become really quite severe. And I just am really interested in this kind of thing because if we were to underwrite something like this, would we have guessed that this is the direction it would be going in? Larger companies. So you think, yeah, sure, a lot of records, but nothing that's falling into the geopolitical spectrum. There's also a stock drop for the company that was really quite pronounced, and that's a little bit unusual too, right? We see that in the beginning, and then we see a rebound, but this is not rebounded to the way that we expected. So I don't know.
Especially in that industry vertical, like you see this as retail, like you'd almost say, what is the NAIC code? Like if it was here, this isn't, you almost wouldn't see those repercussions coming.
Is that just because we're so used to it? Like, breach fatigue is a thing here.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And just like one of those things that like you would expect to resolve. And if you were on the carrier side of this and you had a CEO that's non-cooperative, what would you even do? I mean, you're thinking from the claims response side and what leverage you would have it as an insurer here. Like how do you, start to think about this? I don't even know. It's beyond me.
Because I remember when this popped up last year, and I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, this is the most like just I don't want to say extreme response, but it was the most extreme attempt to hold a company accountable for securing PII. And for that, like there is something there that's commendable. But yeah, I don't know like how far is enough with some of this, because also, we all know what IR is like. Like these are sometimes things that are just inevitable. It's almost an impossible game to try to keep all these things secure. But at the same time, you want to make sure that companies are taking the right steps to, maybe even beyond reasonable steps to try to keep your information safe. But yeah, it's like this one really kind of pushed it to the edge.
One thing I'll just add for context is that when there are international issues in cyber events where there's more than one jurisdiction impacted by a single event, the company does have to think through both the impact to the legal posture of the individual jurisdiction, as well as the aggregate legal posture for the whole company and its brand and its reputation. And there are different standards in the different jurisdictions. There are some jurisdictions where they tie the obligation to notify to whether or not there are servers located in that jurisdiction. There are other jurisdictions where if you do file with the Data Protection Authority, there's going to be a public filing, and that means there's going to be some media impact or some sort of public relations impact. And then there is the correlation between notifying the individual and notifying the data authority, and that also has to be taken into consideration. In other words, sometimes you get more scrutiny from the data authority if you don't notify a corresponding set of individuals that might have been impacted in that jurisdiction. So taken together, these do present multitude of issues, and seeing the way the different authorities handle privacy really does speak to the different cultural differences between our nations and our people.
That was such a breach coach answer.
Hey,
like corresponding.
I bring people together. That's my job. But I just wanted to add some context to the questions that Kelly's raised.
I always noticed in my experience, it's like when you talk to clients now about what's the executive's responsibility, what's management's responsibility, right? And especially if it's a publicly traded company, global company, a lot of the feedback I get, especially from the legal side, is it's within the resources and capabilities that you have. In some cases, you might commend them for saying, we're showing you that this is such a big responsibility that we're willing to step down from it. And there's an element of honor there, right? Versus like our D&O driven society where we're going to defend this till the end, the individual that's involved, right? So to me, I actually find it a little refreshing to see the accountability there. And I quite honestly, like I never really cared about D&O until I got to the broker side. And I would love to see the impact this has towards executives, especially for the larger organizations, about their point of view towards it, right? Because you saw some of this where, like, Jason, your prior experience, you were a C-suite executive for managing information security. Like, what liability does that person have, with completing questionnaires, answering questions versus the CEO or the CFO, right? In the insurance policy, you have the luxury of, some impunity in defending these types of allegations. But in real life, it becomes pretty blurred. So I think it's a very interesting case study, and good thing you pointed it out, Kelly.
Well, and Suresh, to your point, right? I was in the CISO role when Joe Sullivan and Uber became a big thing, and also with I think it's Tim Brown over at SolarWinds, right? And that was the talk for CISOs at that point was, hey, what's the actual risk we're taking on here? And there was a pretty big divide that opened up there, where it's like, hey, if you want to be in the C-suite, you have to take responsibility, just as a CEO and CFO would. But then it comes down to, can you actually drive the change? Do you have the tools necessary and the authority to actually implement some of those changes? And I think like it's kind of settled out a little bit. There's been some new policies coming out that are specifically focused on how do you provide that insurance policy for a CISO individually. But I'll tell you what, like the first thing I was asking when that stuff came out was, hey, am I on the D&O policy? Because it wasn't even clear, right? But that's the things that all CISOs were going through.
There was back when the Joe Sullivan Uber CISO thing came out, that was all everyone could talk about at RSA that year. So it was a bunch of tech nerds going, okay, what are we on the hook for? What are our responsibilities? And I remember a talk track, there was a whole panel saying like CISO, like, oh, doesn't just come for free. Like explaining to all of these technical leaders, like, hey, you want this title, you've also got to fight for the protection. And that was so interesting, Shiraz, to see this explanation. It's almost like it wasn't just an explanation of liability. It was that explanation to technical leadership of like, when you take that responsibility, you've also got to make sure you're covered under the same protections that the other leaders are covered. And that's a new world for that crew. Like it was like, I saw the eyes being opened in those rooms the year that Joe Sullivan got indicted.
Well, I look back, like, again, to date myself, about like, if you looked at what happened like with Enron and in the late 90s, early 2000s, what did they come out and regulators came out, Dodd-Frank and stuff said, now everybody's got to sign off. You can't blame it on the CFO. You can't just blame it on CEO. Like everybody's got to sign off. So does that mean if we do a NIST framework and we look at all 365 and it gets audited and certified, and now the CEO is going to sign off and say, yes, I agree, this is accurate and this is correct. So now in our 10K next year, we could say, yeah, we were absolutely did everything we could within our resources and power to prevent this. Because I think there's one thing to respond to the incident, and then there's the other thing about going forward and stuff like that. So to me, I think that's interesting. And the fact that you had to have a parliamentary hearing is, I think, an interesting factor too, right? Because I keep saying that to clients that are, I would say, in the critical infrastructure space, where, hey, you might need defense costs to go present in front of Congress or even your state Senate or whatever. And that would, Stu, Violet from the legal, even Kelly from the legal perspective, I'm going to assume that's going to be a whole different animal than going to do a regular breach with an attorney general, right?
Yeah, I think that this is like, we're all circling around, just to bring it back to insurance for a minute, because, this is my curiosity is, are we underwriting this the right way? We're underwriting controls. Okay. Like Jason said, we have data breach fatigue in this country. So it's like, we're going to expect something to happen, right? And like, it'll be contained. But then when something sort of has that broad global dynamic or political dynamic, like how do you ingest those type of signals into the underwriting? Like I doubt this was maybe there was some thought, like just the magnitude of the company itself and where it was located. But it seems to me like we have to broaden our horizons when we think about cyber underwriting.
Well, Kelly, I think that's a great point, and I actually would kick this over to get Jason's opinion. I think you might have to complete an application for each business unit as its own individual company, right? I've noticed in my experience that if you're looking at a larger multinational, there's multiple CISOs, right? So like if you're working for ABC Insurance Carrier North America, but the headquarters is in Europe, Is that the same CISO? Is that being given the same controls, regulatory exposure? And that's where it would. You're getting the same, how much should we be asking? But I notice that now, because when we're talking to clients prior to going out to the market, you're discussing the questionnaire and they're going, well, this business unit, it would be this way. And this business unit is going to be that way. But if you go to the market and say, here's 10 different applications, like, is that what you should be doing, shouldn't be doing? Right. So I think there's a little bit of balance there. If Kelly, like if you're looking at these larger organizations, you look at it per business unit, I think you would get more comfort on the insurance side with what's going on for these larger complex networks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's actually a brilliant idea because you're going to have more specialized CISOs, and like sometimes they'll call them a BISO, which is more for the business specific side. But it's all going to be different,
right? You taught me that term, the field CISO, of the person that's out kind of explaining it and validating it and selling it, but doesn't have to have the responsibilities. I want that one.
Yeah, prominent in the product company world.
Yeah.
I would only add one thing about the CISO as being ultimately responsible or signing off on things, is that it also creates an interesting dynamic in the company. And we've been privy to those discussions where, their business units want to do something because they want to go out and make money. They want to go out and push something. And the security officer sits there and says, wait a second, guys, my name is on that document. Like, before you go out and do that, slow down. Can we just talk it through? So there is an interesting dynamic, and I hopefully it does result in a better, more secure product or service.
Well, we got to get on to the next. We only have 13 minutes left. So we got to get on to the next news story. Jason, what's been on your mind?
So it's always AI at this point.
We
have yet another example of where an agent has gone rogue and deleted a production database.
This was a big story. Yeah.
It got so much attention, and rightly so. But, I went into this and I was like, why do we keep blaming the agent, right? And as I was digging into this, what I'm realizing, right, and I've been saying this all along, but now it's just becoming more and more clear, right? The issue with agents is that they exasperate existing misconfigurations and vulnerabilities in your environment. And so when you dig into the details of this particular scenario, there's a few things that stand out. Number one, the agent had access to a API key that was sitting on this developer's system, right? So that's just poor credential hygiene, right? That then unlocked the ability for this agent to interact with the cloud environment that this organization was using. Well, that cloud organization had a lot of bad configuration and design decisions. Number one, that access token had the ability to interact with everything, absolutely everything. So they weren't doing least privilege for it, right? Number two, the backups were stored on the same volume as the production data. So we talk about air gap backups. That wasn't a thing. And three, there was no human in the loop force here for a destructive command. And so the agent, as it often is trying to do, is just trying to solve a task. And while it was trying to solve it, it found this credential and then tried to delete, or not try, it did delete that volume. And because of the bad configurations, now that company's production data was completely toast, and they had to go back. I think it was 3 months was the last backup they had. So
3 months of data gone.
3 months, yeah. And so this is the problem. It's just
How
it
long
exasperates
before,
all the bad
how long
configuration.
before this agent was engaged to do its job till this happened? Like, what was the period of time where there was no human in the loop?
So they're saying that it was 9 seconds from when the agent started to do something to when the command happened.
That doesn't feel okay.
That's why, I don't think we can blame the agent as much as we want, right? But the agent is the enabler, and it's basically the person that's calling out all the bad things that are already present in the environment. And so, yes, you need to be in a position where you're putting control over these agents, but you're not doing any of the things to, one, get control of the agent, and two, it's all the housekeeping that you need to be doing and being aware of. That's the challenge that every company has today.
Quality control, right? The agent is just an inexperienced, well-educated employee. That's what I keep explaining to people. It's like the intern that's super talented, but has no real life experience.
And you've given
And now
access.
you're handing them over something that would have been typically managed by a 10 to 15 year person who's ingrained in the business, been trained by you and everything. And I think like that's where I think we're skipping the baby steps and going straight out there. And the interesting thing is probably not covered under any insurance policy because nobody really covers first party loss or expenses incurred based on an error of our own technology product. And it's actually the error of our own computer system. So it's like, can you give me system failure with 0 waiting period? And you know, don't say disruption is required, right? Because nothing was really disrupted, right? It's more of it's the digital agent made an error or an omission, which led to a first party loss. And if I was going around talking about, do you need coverage for AI? This is one of the things that I would talk about that the market has not addressed. Is this, and there are some people dancing around regulatory proceedings, right? Because now it's a tech product failing, not your computer system. And there's this interplay between what is a tech product, which is hardware, software, yada, 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 that I give to someone, license to someone, maintain for someone, versus a computer system, which is hardware, software, yada, yada, that's operated, owned, leased by my organization.
So what would you call it? Like agent, you know?
Well, I've been asking Violet to say include a digital agent as an insured person.
That's creative.
Because
Okay.
they're acting as an employee. You replaced ABC employee with ABC agent, and now you would have to then ask for this new coverage, if any, Kelly, if you're interested, a first party loss because the digital agent made an error, right? Think about from the carrier side, if you had a digital agent that does the clearance, and for some reason it keeps on thinking that your company that you're going to insure has an OFAC violation.
Yeah.
And it keeps declining because of that. And it takes you a while to realize. And after 100 submissions have been declined, light bulb goes off and goes, wait a minute, this is wrong. What do we do? How much did we lose? And there's no one to turn to.
The first thing that strikes me is like, you know, it's probably underratable. Like Jason laid out, you know, all the things that should have been done. So it's probably underratable. And probably the agent, like you said, is like a person and maybe as fallible, or maybe less fallible. But I guess that the scale of the damage, right? Like that's what's I think harder to underwrite too. But I do think there's something here. The other thing that's sort of in my mind is like how much tolerance will companies have for stuff like this? You know, when we're talking about making investments into AI and AI agents, you know, it's huge and people feel a lot of pressure top down to be doing that. And what's the ROI when something happens like this? Or what's the risk tolerance? Like, do you sort of like, you know, back down from this or do you move forward? I mean, it's highly embarrassing. And obviously they got the data back, I mean, or most of it, but you know, just thinking about the long-term ROI on AI, it's really efficiency gains after these types of things. I don't know.
Yeah.
One thing I'll add though is that I first caught this story on a social media platform because allegedly the person who made the mistake made a very public first person accounting of his mistake and what happened and what he learned. And so they were already thinking about, you know, making lemonade from lemons and how can I spin this into more brand awareness for, you know, for my stuff. So I do feel you, Kelly, on that last part, for sure.
Yeah, but this is where like we just have to treat this as like one, we should be thinking about it as this is replacing some human tasks, right? So I think there's a very close parallel to an existing employee executing tasks that that employee typically would do, but we also have to extend the control plane out to that, right? So this is where like we are moving way faster than our ability to try to secure and control that. And so I think the ROI is there. These little things are going to be popping up. I mean, there's probably like 3 or 4 examples of this just this year alone. But the gains that companies are getting are still far outweighing it. But this is why like we have to think of it as new controls we have to put in place. And this is all of our existing issues just become that much more accessible. Because Shiraz, you're right. Like, this is just an inexperienced intern that is super powerful and will find all of the dirty laundry because that's what it's good at.
And didn't Anthropic release some sort of skill after this that was supposed to encourage the user to check for things before they execute? I
was going in the same direction. Quality assurance manager of the AI is the job of the future. Like, instead of managing 4 underwriters, you're going to manage 5 digital agents. What's the psychology on that one? Well, how do I motivate this agent? Go ahead. Somebody was going to else was going to comment.
In the break room. It's just going to be forever. It's always that. Well, I had a quick throw in because I was going to talk a lot about giving law enforcement a pat on the back globally. But because we only have 4 minutes, instead of going into every single story, I thought that there was a really interesting FBI warning lately about the cyber warnings towards cargo theft and how cyber is being used as a method to basically actually have impact to cargo and theft of physical objects and physical logistics. That to me really is a news story that goes squarely in what we've been talking about when it comes to PD and a lot of the issues that brokers are raising, right? Shiraz, of how are we thinking about not just the digital assets, but physical assets when there's a cyber incident that impacts physical assets and theft?
I think that's good. And it's actually connected to the story I was going to talk about, which was Stryker. And I think it interconnects here, right? So a property policy typically covers the contents within the building and the building itself, right? The premises and the content. And where you usually see overlap is that content, the computer system itself, and that's where the concept of bricking and stuff came from, right? But in terms of property damage, in this case, no one was physically hurt, right? And no building was blown up or something like that. But 200,000 devices is what I read in the media were rendered unusable.
Completely wiped. Yeah.
All right.
By their own tools, the tools that were management software. It wasn't like a ransomware that wiped the tools. It was tools used in an appropriate way with access in an unauthorized manner.
All right. So now in this case, they didn't have to replace everything, right? And there was no fire, there was no smoke, there was no explosion, right? And in those cases, if you drill down into those two things, I think there's a lot of movement in the property side. I've done a lot of research on this because many times their property policy is going to say, as long as there's fire, smoke, explosion, collapse, sprinkler leakage, we have some coverage. I think the gray area is something called mechanical or electrical breakdown and system failure. But in 2 minutes, we don't have enough to discuss that. Instead, I'd rather ask Jason, based on his experience, how much do you think it costs to do 200,000 recalled devices, re-wipe to make sure everything's out, re-image to get everything back in there, and then sent back out to everyone to use it? What are we thinking? Because when we talk to larger organizations or even smaller organizations, when they want to benchmark their potential loss, we get into record count. And I'm saying, no, you need to get into endpoint count.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Go ahead, Jason. 1 minute. Lightning round.
I mean, millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. And that is assuming that they've set up a very good factory to reset those things. I would imagine like easily at least $8 to $10 million plus.
And how much time though?
That's where I thought the labor cost, if I calculated, let's say it took 4 hours per device and we hired a company to do that and they charge, let's just say $200 or $250 an hour, you're talking billions.
That's what, that's the factory you set up. You need to be doing at least 15 to 20 of these things in parallel. And we've stood up these things before where you got a factory literally going, people coming in, dropping it off, and it's getting pumped back out a couple hours later. But there's a lot of time that gets spent to get that set up. Otherwise, you're dead in the water.
Well, with that, we do have to close it out. So we're going to do a quick unveiling of next month's show on June 5th. We're going to have Ana Maria Landaverde and David Stoss. So both from the insurance side again and privacy legal side. And we are so happy to have our guests, Kelly and Shiraz, join us. This was the fastest 30 minutes I think we've had to date. This was a lightning speed round. And we can't wait till next time. Stu, any parting words?
Just follow everybody if you're not already doing so. Kelly's account's great. Shiraz's account, great. Follow Jason and Violet and me. Otherwise, happy Friday.